So good evening again, everyone. My name is Ashley. I'm the Volunteer and Outreach Coordinator here at Napa RCD. And we here in Napa County at the RCD are a non-regulatory agency. So we do a whole bunch of different things. We do biological monitoring. We do education programs in classrooms and out in the field. We do community education programs like this one. And we also work with vineyards and landowners with rural roads and irrigation, all sorts of things to help, just to really help all of us, no matter who we are in Napa County, care for the land, water, soil, and wildlife that we rely on so much for enjoyment and for just to live. So we are currently right in the middle of Bay Friendly Garden Month. If you've been following along, thank you so much. We're really excited about our lineup of activities that we have going on. We are hosting this particular talk in partnership with the City of Napa Water Division, the Napa Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program, Our Water, Our World, and Plant Harmony, who Suzanne is representing tonight. If you'd like, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat boxes in both Facebook and in Zoom. And you can email me if you would like to get updates on things that are happening for Bay Friendly Garden Month or our monthly RCD newsletter in general. So you can use that to see past and future presentations, what's available, how to see it, things like that. And for more information on Bay Friendly Garden Month in particular, you can go to naparcd.org/2020 Garden Month. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jameson. So hold on, let me unmute you, Jameson. I think I took away your ability to unmute yourself. There we go.
I had virtual duct tape over my mouth. Thank you for peeling it away. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our seminar this evening on organic vegetable gardening in Napa County. My name is Jameson Crosby. I'm the manager of the very long-winded Napa Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. Real quickly, stormwater is very simply the water that runs off the land as a result of precipitation. And as you can imagine, as it runs off the land toward our creeks and rivers and bay, it picks up all manner of pollution along the way. And this is everything from oil and grease, bacteria that might come from plant waste, occasionally people, sediment, and relevant to our topic tonight, pesticides and herbicides. So one of the best things you can do to prevent water pollution is to apply organic principles in your home landscape, in your garden, and that's exactly what our talk tonight is all about. And incidentally, I wanted to let you know that this we're planning more webinars like this, specifically on various aspects of less toxic pest management for the home and garden. So please check back on the county's stormwater webpage for some dates going forward into the summer. And I'll have that website at the very end of the presentation where you can get those dates once. We haven't set them yet, but probably another one in the next month or so. Our presenter tonight is Suzanne Bontempo of Plant Harmony. Suzanne is an avid horticulturalist, an IPM educator, and all-around garden guru. IPM, incidentally, if you haven't heard that acronym, stands for Integrated Pest Management, and she will touch on that during her talk tonight. So really, with no further delay, let me turn you over to Suzanne to start the presentation.
Thank you so much, Jameson. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Wanted to confirm that I am not muted. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. Okay, super. So let me just, all right, I wanted to get my screen set. All right, thank you so much. Yes, I'm Suzanne Bontempo. I am the program manager for Our Water, Our World, and in partnership with Napa County Stormwater and the Resource Conservation District. So let's get started. Just really quick, before we start, what is Our Water, Our World? I know that it's not always recognized by name, but oftentimes we go, oh, yes, I know what it is when we see what the materials are. It is a program that is in partnership with the Napa Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Agency, and retail stores. So you will see these materials in a lot of the retail garden centers and hardware stores throughout the county. Feel free to pick up those materials, the fact sheets. They have a lot of really great information on how we solve pest problems less toxically. And you'll also see those little shelf talkers that are going to guide us to those products that are less toxic. All right. I'm really excited about our program tonight. I do want to really respect everyone's time, and my intention is to finish this educational program at 8 o'clock. However, we are going to stay as long as you have questions. So I am going to pause a couple of times throughout the program, but again, just to keep on point with time, I'm going to maybe move along a little quicker, maybe not pause as often. I'm really excited to talk to you about how to grow a successful vegetable garden. Have you ever had that situation where you wanted to get started on a garden project and you just didn't really know how to get started, or you're a little overwhelmed by the process? Or you went to the garden center, loaded up your cart with beautiful plants, all these vegetable starts, you got all the goodies, and you went home and you spent all this time and energy planting, and everything looked great. But then a couple days pass, maybe a couple weeks pass, and then things start going sideways and you're like, oh dear, I don't know what just happened. Well, guess what? I hear this story all the time. And tonight, what I am going to share with you is a couple tricks of the trade. Starts by increasing by just simply increasing the health of the soil. We're going to reduce pest problems. We're going to talk about what vegetables are best to plant. We're going to talk about how to water effectively and efficiently, how to attract the good bugs to our garden so that they can take care of a lot of the bad bugs and keep the balance, why cover crops are so incredible, and then I'm going to offer more resources for support. Did you know it all starts with the soil? This is why I was asking the early guests what kind of soil they have, so I can get a really good sense of what you're challenged with. Because guess what? Soil is not as easy as you think it would be. We really want to understand and know the type of soil we have, because once we plant plants, it's not as easy to dig down in there unless we remove the entire plant. We're not really going to see what's going on. So far this evening, I've heard from many of you that you have clay soil. No surprise. Pretty much the entire Bay Area is gifted with clay, let's say. Good news is that clay does hold a lot of nutrients. Sad news, water doesn't move through it very well. What we want to do is take the time to really build healthy soil as soon as we can. A few of you said you've been working on your soil for years, and finally the soil is really nice and loamy and workable. This is key. So how do we build healthy soil? We work with composts, really good quality compost that we either purchase at the garden center, the home improvement store, or we make at home. We use organic fertilizers and we feed our plants with organic fertilizers, and we take advantage of mulch. All of the magical properties of mulch are all going to increase the health of our soil. We could start by amending our soil. Now, when we go to the store to buy bags of compost, it's not so clear because of the labels, all of these names. We're not really sure what we're buying. But I'm here to tell you that all of these are pretty much the same, be it planting mix, compost, soil amendment, soil conditioner. These are all kind of words for the exact same thing. What I encourage you to do is flip that bag over and look at the ingredients that are within that bag. We really want to make sure we're actually buying something that we're comfortable putting into our soil. These are all extremely good quality products. A couple little things I like to note is the OMRI certification, which is the Organic Materials Review Institute, or CDFA. off the top of my head, I can't tell you what that is. I'm going to mess it up. But anyway, these are organic certifications that are really important that I would encourage you to look for. The reason why we want to amend our soil with good quality compost, again, either compost we made at home or compost that we purchased in those bags, or even in bulk at the landscape supply yard, is because we want to inoculate those soils with beneficial microbiology, be it bacteria or fungi. There's many microbes, little microscopic organisms in the soil that are helping our soil break down organic materials, break down the toxins and the pollutants, help the soil's water holding capacity, or in some cases with the clay, help the water move through the soil and evaporate out with more ease. I like to say that it's the nutrient transport enhancement system. So this is what we're trying to do, is really trying to increase the health of the soil. And we do that by adding compost. Doesn't matter if you've got clay soil, rocky soil, sandy soil, compost will fix it all. All right. We want to work with organic fertilizers. Here are just a couple examples of what I call these dry fertilizers, or I should say I refer to these as dry fertilizers, because when we open up the box or the bag, it's actually going to look like oatmeal or like grain, crushed up grains. I am certainly not here to endorse any of these products. However, I can share these are products that we're readily going to see when we go to any of the garden centers or home improvement stores that we shop at. So that's why these images are here. We work with organic fertilizers so that we can feed the plants more naturally, at a more natural rate. Understand that synthetic fertilizers, when we apply those, and synthetic fertilizers are typically those fertilizers that we see that are different colored little beads, maybe like pink, green, white beads that we'd be applying, or we mix it with water, it turns blue. These are going to be synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are going to be high in salts. Salts are quite detrimental to the soil. They actually encourage plants to and stimulate a lot of new growth. They're almost like steroids for plants. When we have a lot of new growth that has a lot of sugars and tender little leaves, what we discover is that insects also like that new growth. So when we're working with organic fertilizers, we're actually feeding at a more natural rate. We're not pushing a lot of unnatural new growth. So the plant's able to grow at a nice rate that's not going to attract as many insects. We're also going to be able to feed our plant for long-term sustainable success. We also, since we're growing vegetables and food crops, I like to also introduce you to liquid organic fertilizers. So in addition to applying those dry fertilizers to the soil, at time of planting, I will add that fertilizer. I'll dig the little hole, I'll put a little fertilizer in that hole, and then I'll plant my plant within that hole so that that fertilizer is going to be within the root zone. That's important. Well, once that plant starts to grow, when I'm growing vegetables or food crops, I need to really feed my food crops because I want those food crops to feed me. So throughout the growing season, I will be applying a liquid fertilizer, a very good quality organic liquid fertilizer that I mix with water according to the label's instructions. And I'll apply this maybe every other week, maybe once a month throughout the growing season. It really helps support those plants and really gives it a little bit more of that vigor that you'd like to see. I also am a huge fan of working with mulch. Mulch is going to reduce water evaporation rate significantly. It's going to protect that soil, keeping the soil cool in the summer, warm in the winter. It's going to prevent that clay soil from getting from turning into concrete, essentially. So when we do want to go and dig into that soil, we're actually able to somehow get a shovel in there. If it were bare, it would just be, hard as rock. Mulch also provides habitat for a lot of our beneficial insects, such as ladybugs. And as it breaks down, it's actually feeding the soil. A couple things I'll point out is that we want to make sure when we do add mulch to our on top of the soil around the plants, that we're actually not bringing it up around the crown of the plant. We always want to make sure the crown of that plant, where the root system and the stalk of the plant meet, is the crown. We want to make sure that is free of any debris, any mulch, but we'll put mulch around the base of the plant a couple inches out from the stem, from the trunk. I can also share that I will leave some areas of my garden raw, without mulch, ungroomed. I will not bother it because I know that we have a lot of native bees in the area that are ground dwellers. So I will keep some areas undisturbed without mulch. Just let the plants kind of grow like crazy, no problem, so that I can support my native bees. The planning. This is the fun part. I like to ask everyone to go out into their garden, wherever they'd like to plant a new flower bed or vegetable bed, and notice the sun. How is the sun moving through your garden? This is really important because if we don't have enough sunshine for a plant that wants full sun, which is 6 or more hours of full direct sunlight. If we only have part sun or part shade conditions, which is 3 to 6 hours, and we want to plant something that wants full sun more than 6 hours, that plant's going to struggle. A couple cool things I can share is when we go to the garden center, plants come with tags. These tags have so much great information. Have a look at these tags. The tags are going to share how many hours of sun it needs, and they do that with this code. It either says full sun, part sun, and or part shade. It might say shade. It rarely says dappled sun. However, I added this just so that when you go to the garden center and you have the opportunity to ask an associate if they're available at the store at this time. I know we are starting to lift some sheltering in place restrictions, but the businesses are still very lightly staffed because of the situation that we're in. Or if you happen to look up in like a Sunset Western Garden book, understand that filtered sunlight is a term, or dappled sunlight is a term you might read about. And that's going to be from like lattice or from a canopy of a tree where it's dappled sunlight, as opposed to full shade, which would be, of course, from like a wall or a fence. And then for some of you, growing it straight into the ground is not an option. Either gophers have gone crazy and it's just not possible, or maybe the soil is just too crummy and you just really can't get in there. So consider planting in raised beds. It's not the only way, but it's a way that can kind of help you work around some of the challenges that we're faced with. When I build my raised beds, I will always line the bottom with either 1/2-inch hardware cloth or gopher wire. Because even though I might not have gophers in my immediate garden, I know neighbors 2 doors down to have gophers. And I will tell you, those gophers send a memo out. And if they know that there are vegetables that they can eat the roots of, they are going to find a way over to my garden. So save yourself the headache later and take the extra time now to prepare any garden that you have by either lining the bottom of a raised bed with gopher wire or planting some of the perennial vegetables that we'll talk about in a minute, or fruit trees in gopher baskets. This is a really important extra step. The other cool thing about raised beds is that we're able to now put really good quality soil in that raised bed. They have raised bed mixes or planting mixes that you can buy nowadays. It's really terrific. We're also able to actually use less water. Why is that? Because we're actually just now controlling the water. The area that we're watering is just confined to this one raised bed. So we're using less water. We now have the opportunity to protect the root systems from gophers, and we're actually able to put really good, yummy soil into that. The next thing I can share is you can see the picture that's on the left. My leafy greens, they're growing. It might look a little crowded. I did that intentionally. I did that because I'm going to go through, and as I harvest, I kind of harvest every other plant so that I could be clearing space so the plants can continue to grow. But the thing that this does is that as the plants grow, you don't see the soil, do you? It's actually protecting the soil and preventing what, or I should say not preventing, but reducing water evaporation rate. It's shading the soil and it's shading the root system. So this is going to keep the root systems a little cooler as the heat comes on. Also, when we have the plants growing so nicely together, it's creating this microclimate under there that really supports the growth of these vegetables. This is an example of how I plant. Instead of planting in rows or on maybe a square grid that is very common, I actually plant on this hex pattern. This allows me to get more plants per square foot. This is really ideal for smaller planting areas. So if we have just one raised bed, or if we have a smaller garden where we don't have a lot of square footage, we can get a lot of plants in a small space. It's ideal. All right. At this stage, I would like to pause and see if there are any questions. Maybe, let's see. I'm not sure if I can see the chat. Let me see if I can see the chat. Or.
So Jameson has answered a couple already.
Right.
But we did have a couple of questions. Megan has a question, 2 questions. First, do you recommend sheet mulching over compacted clay soil?
Oh, heck yeah. I am crazy for sheet mulching. I sheet mulch pretty much whenever I come into a new garden, or if I am going to start a new garden project and it is clay soil and I can buy myself some time, I will definitely get started with sheet mulching, because after that, 6-12 months, just, waiting, that when I'm ready to plant, that soil is so yummy and workable. It is a dream. It is a dream.
So Megan's second question is, and I think Jameson sort of threw an answer to this into the chat, but what are the best bulk mulch resources in Napa? And Jameson mentioned Upper Valley Disposal Service has a bulk mulch program, and so does Napa Recycling and Waste Services.
Thank you, Jameson.
And then Sarah had a question. As far as fertilizers go, is Miracle-Gro a viable option?
Miracle-Gro is now making an organic fertilizer that is certified organic. It's called Performance Organics, I believe. I may have that mixed up at the moment, and it is, we are getting a lot of good feedback from it. So that is the one product that I can say that Miracle-Gro makes. But the other traditional Miracle-Gro products that turn blue when you add water, those are going to be synthetic. And I would really encourage you to maybe just fertilize your orchids with them, or really limit the amount of the plants that you use. Maybe containers or hanging baskets would be ideal for that. Color bowls, plants that that at the end of the season, you're just going to probably put in the green can. but not in the garden. I would not use a synthetic fertilizer in the garden.
All right, so we have a couple of questions that have come in on Facebook as well, so I'm going to get those going.
Sure.
Does the planting pattern work for any kind of plants? For example, would this hex pattern be too many tomato plants in a raised bed?
Great question. Well, no, if you can support them. So we can plant, and I push a lot of limits, and I plant my tomatoes pretty close, but I have trellises, really heavy duty trellises, kind of like wire fencing that I have with Tease stakes to hold the weight of the tomato up. That is the challenge. So as long as you can offer really good support, or if you have like those Texas tomato cages, I'm not sure if that's really the term that's anymore, but these are these heavy duty, thick gauge that fold up when you're not using them, and then you open them up, they can hold the weight. As long as you have the support, you can plant pretty darn close. But still, I would probably give my plants a good 2 feet, 3 feet between planting. I'd say 2 feet. I would not say 3 feet. I'm probably planting mine at about 20, 24 inches apart.
Great. So next question is from Margot. And can you just really quickly do an overview of what does it mean when we say sheet mulch?
Oh, sheet mulch. We're going to put down cardboard, oftentimes multiple layers. Make sure it's overlapped so that you cannot see the soil. That's the key here. We do not want any sun to be able to get to touch that soil. And then we're going to do no less than 3 inches of mulch. Now you can do a combination between compost and mulch, but the magic number here is no less than 3 inches. Then we're going to water it. It's going to get wet, and then we're just going to let that magic happen. Worms start coming in out of nowhere, decomposing it. It's amazing. My email's at the end of the slide. You can please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to give you a one sheet on that.
Excellent. Do you want to take a couple more questions now, or should we move on?
Let's move on.
Okay, I'll keep your questions. For those of you who have put questions in the chat boxes, I'll record them, and then we'll save them to the end.
Okay, super. All right, so now, which plants are best? We ask ourselves this all the time. What am I supposed to do? What should I plant? What's going to be the best thing? Well, guess what? What do you like to eat? That's what I like to ask, because let's start with the food that we already enjoy eating and then expand from there. Another really fun thing I like to share, and I'd like to invite you to explore, is the world of heirloom vegetables. Nowadays, here in the Bay Area, it seems like heirloom vegetables are everywhere. We can go to our garden center and buy 4-inch plants or 6-packs of these heirloom vegetables. It's so cool that we have such a nice variety. And the reason why I mention heirlooms is because so many of the heirloom varieties are from a Mediterranean region, just like where we live right now. We are in a Mediterranean region. And this is important because Mediterranean regions do not get summer water. Although we are getting a little bit of rain now. Doesn't it seem a little late? However, you know, things are changing. We might start getting summer rains, but for the most part, Mediterranean means summer dry. And that means these plants will adapt to our gardens really well. We don't have to spend a lot of extra efforts making sure we're watering them. They can just adapt with ease. And I just like to ask if anybody recognizes this tower of squash. This is from the Heirloom Expo, this amazing show that happens every year, the beginning of September up at the fairgrounds in Sonoma. Please check it out. For those of you that are close enough, Napa is not very far, about 45 minutes away. It is a really cool show. It's the Heirloom Expo. All right, so vegetables are really going to be, or the food crops I kind of split up into a couple categories. Annual vegetables. These are going to be the food crops that we're just planting once a year. They just have their season, such as, you know, the leafy greens, the tomatoes, carrots, chard, things like that, tomatoes. And then we have, sorry, my cursor. Then we have our perennial vegetables, and perennial vegetables are going to be the food crops that have a lifespan of 2 years or longer. So asparagus, artichokes, you might think of rhubarb, scarlet runner beans. This is one of my most favorites. This is a perennial vegetable that is a green bean that has, that's a 3-season bean. And I am really a fan of the plants that give you multiple food crops, such as beets are always a 2-for-1 because you got the tops and the bottoms. So scarlet runner beans are going to give you a green bean that we harvest early in the season. As the season goes on, that bean might get a little tougher, and so then we're going to cook it more like a stew or soup bean. And then we can harvest the beans and have them dry throughout the winter months to put in soups and stews or make like refried beans. Totally cool. Tree collards are another really fun vegetable that I'm a huge fan of. This is my tree collard on the left. Sorry, I just hacked away at it. It was a huge monster. This tree collard is pretty much close to 7 feet tall. The trunk on it is a solid 6 inches in diameter. I've never seen one so big. I don't know what happened to this guy. But tree collards, they are more like a kale. If you're thinking of vegetables, it's less like a collard green, more like a kale. And it is the food that a plant that just is nonstop giving us food. You get a lot of bang for your buck. Berries and ground cherries, I really am a huge fan to explore these areas. Even just one raspberry that I have, and it's not very big, it's already pumping out berries like crazy. It's really remarkable how there's a lot of plants out there that can give you so much food for just the small space that they are. Ground cherries are also really fun. I encourage you to check them out. You know, hunt for them around at a friend's house and see if they're growing any, or your local garden center. They're kind of like a gooseberry or a tomatillo is kind of what they're like. And their flavor is really unique and unusual. A lot of fun to grow. Garden herbs. I feel like this is a category that we kind of overlook, but what a great category to consider. These are all going to, well, most of these are going to be perennials. A couple of them are annuals, but easy to harvest the seeds and grow them again. This is going to be a lot of fun. Herbs are typically very, very easy to grow. They can be grown on patios and containers or out in the garden. A lot of fun, a lot of fun. Fruit trees and vines are also going to be really great to include in your food gardens. This is a kiwi vine. I just like to add this photo, share it with you, because have you ever seen the flowers from the kiwi? I really have to say, I've only noticed this. This was just a couple years ago where I noticed the flower, and I just thought it was really cool. So I wanted to share it with you. Miniature fruit trees are really fantastic for smaller spaces, or even if you just want to grow a fruit tree in a container. So this is a true miniature. This is on a miniature rootstock. This is not a dwarf. So this is going to be ideal for, you see it right here in a half barrel, great way to grow, have your fruit trees. If you don't have a lot of space, this is a nectarine. It's going to max at about 4 to 5 feet. And as you see by the flowers, it's going to be loaded with fruits. Espalier fruit trees are also really fun, especially if we have a wall like on the side of the garage that gets full sun all day, or a fence line. Not a really great plant to photograph, so I apologize for this, but the espalier fruit trees are really flat, and they can create a fence or a living wall with a lot of ease. And don't forget to plant the flowers that attract our good bugs and pollinators. So this is a really important part of the equation that I feel that so many of us kind of overlook. I can't tell you how many times I see people with their carts loaded up with vegetables and not a single flower on there. Flowers are as important as the food that we're buying. And the reason why is because we want to attract as many of the beneficial insects as possible. This goes for our natural enemies, such as ladybugs and lacewings, or our pollinators, such as our bees, to help increase the yields. Something I'd like you to notice in this picture are that there's a couple different types of flowers here. There's other flowers that look like daisies or sunflowers, such as the Gaillardia, the Erigeron, the Cosmo. We see that this might be a single flower, but those petals are actually the rays. And the center cone of that flower, that's actually all the little flowers that our pollinators and our beneficial insects that are nectar feeders are going to come and feed off of and enjoy. Then we have another type of flower that is like this yarrow right here, where it might look like one flat head of flowers. It's a cluster of a lot of little flowers, or the alyssum down in the corner. That alyssum is kind of hiding. It's going to be a lot of tiny little flowers. And let me tell you, in my lettuce bed, I will always plop 1 or 2 alyssum plants from a 6-pack. So you're just buying 1 6-pack of alyssum, but I'm just putting like 1 or 2 in. That alyssum will grow. It grows really well with lettuce, and it does enough to attract the good bugs I need to take care of any insects that might be bugging my lettuce. These are some of the friends we want to invite to the garden. This is going to be our hoverflies, our ladybugs, our lacewings, our bees, be it the European honeybee or native bees, our dragonflies, and our parasitic wasps. A lot of fun. And ultimately what we want to do is to reduce the pesticide usage. When we want to go for a pesticide, because let's just say that threshold of aphids on the roses or on the kale is just too crazy. And we've tried blasting it off with water, although I would encourage you to still just blast with water or wipe with your fingers. But if you really feel like you need to go and use a pesticide, please make sure you're using the least toxic one possible. Follow the guides that our Water Our World offers, the suggestions that we have for less toxic pesticides. Always spray towards the end of the day. This will ensure that our pollinators are not as active, so we won't accidentally spray them, because guess what? These pesticides, even though they're eco-friendly, can still affect our beneficial insects and our pollinators. So just be aware of that. Really try to push some limits, try some other things. And in fact, guess what? In 2 weeks from tonight, we're hosting another webinar, another class that's specifically just going to talk about pest problem solving. So if you're curious and you'd like to learn how to solve some pest problems less toxically, maybe even without pesticides, please join that class. All right. I'm going to move through. There's just a couple more points, and then we'll circle back for some questions. So the next topic I want to talk about, I want to share with you why working with cover crops is so cool. Fava beans are my favorite cover crop. There are a lot of other types. However, I want to introduce you to fava beans. Some of you avid gardeners are probably already familiar with the fava beans, but fava beans are super cool because not only are they adding nitrogen, little nodulars of nitrogen to the soil, they are a really awesome food. So I'm a huge fan of the fava bean tips. When the fava bean plant is young, I will harvest the tips at about maybe 3-4 inches. I will chop it up, saute it with some garlic and sesame oil. It is delicious. And then of course, as the plants grow, you can enjoy the fava beans, and then of course letting them go to full maturity where you have the hard bean to harvest for the next year. However, if you're using fava beans as a cover crop, we are not going to let the plant go all the way to full maturity. We are going to cut the plant at the base. You see here, I'm pulling the plant to the side. I'm going to get my shears and cut it right there at the base, at the point of flower. Right when that plant starts to pop those beautiful black and white flowers is when I'm going to cut this at the base. Why? Because see those beautiful little nodulars of nitrogen fixed bacteria on the slide on the right? Sorry, the photo on the right. That is nitrogen that that plant has created as food for itself. And if we are to let that plant go to full bean, which I do, I let some of the plants in a certain area where I'm not using as a cover crop, I will let those plants go to full bean. The way they can create those beautiful large beans that they create is that nitrogen, once they go to flower and they start to push bean, that nitrogen gets lifted from the root system and absorbed into the plant. I hope that makes sense. I need to drink some water. So now we have this free nitrogen that we just created by using this plant. What we want to do, we're cutting at the base. Let's go back to that hex pattern. We can even use a square pattern if that's easy, like on a grid. And we're going to plant our plants, such as tomatoes, opposite where these were. So the fava beans were planted on one grid. We're going to shift that grid and plant our tomatoes or zucchini squash or whatever it is just off center. So as the root systems of my tomato plants grow, it will start to weave in with my fava bean root systems and access that beautiful nitrogen. Isn't that cool? I love it. And then of course the tops make amazing green manure. Either chop it in your compost or chop it up into another area, put it underneath that cardboard when you're doing your sheet mulching. As it decomposes, it's amazing. All right. Now, well, I think I want to keep going. Well, no, actually, let's see. Let's just ask a couple questions. Let's see if we've got a question. Maybe I'll take one.
Oh, I had to pick one. Oh, I'm so sorry, everyone, if I don't pick the right question. Let's see. This is a question we've gotten from a couple of different people on both platforms. How do I prevent my tomatoes from getting eaten by hornworms?
Great question. Well, monitoring. So you already know that that is possible. You've already had this experience. You already know that they're coming to your garden. So get out there and observe, look, hunt, become the hornworm hunter, and go through, although they're tricky and they blend right in, but holy smokes, you know they get to be the size of your thumb. So at some point there, you can see them. And sadly, I don't encourage people killing them because they become a really important pollinator. It's a sphinx moth or a hummingbird moth. It's actually a nocturnal moth that will pollinate at night. They're really cool. They're very important. So if you've got kids in the family, or if there's any type of kids in the neighborhood that you can bring them these hornworms, they can put them in the terrarium, and then they can watch them go through their metamorphosis. It's kind of cool. However, to your question, I would go through, hand pick them off. If you need to dispose of them, just drop them in soapy water. There's also a product called BT that you can purchase at the garden center that you can apply as a pesticide that is very narrow spectrum, and it only will affect caterpillars. So it's going to be really very effective for the tomato hornworm. And good news is that the tomato is not a host for any of our beneficial butterflies. So you're pretty safe to say you're only going to be targeting this one caterpillar. However, if you can be brave enough to let it live, to go through, to become its beautiful hummingbird moth that it is, I encourage you to do so. Oh, it's a great question, Ashley. Nice job.
I'm so glad I picked the right one.
Yeah, that was fun.
We have a whole bunch piling up on both Zoom and Facebook, so you're going to be busy at the end.
Okay, good. I hope everyone doesn't mind sticking around to hear their questions answered. I only have a little bit more to go, so I'm just going to keep moving along. So the next is learning how to water. This is probably one of the hardest things to teach people, so that's why I'd like to spend a little time on this topic. Before I talk about watering, I want to back up and talk about how we plant plants. So this is just something I like to throw in. Remember I showed you these little tags that the plants come with? This is going to be a great tool. When we have our plants that we've purchased at the store, when we pull them out of their container, typically the root systems are pretty mature and they're in the form of that pot. Well, it's really important that we tease those roots out so that we can encourage the roots to start growing down and out. That's important. The reason why is because when we water, we want to encourage the root systems of these plants to grow down and out. So at the beginning, we might be favoring that very small little root system because that's where the roots are. So we want to focus the water there. But as the plant grows, we're going to start to focus the water deeper and further out. So here's an illustration I drew. I apologize. Yes, it was me, not a 6-year-old, but I wanted to help you understand what's going on under the soil surface. So this is really designed to talk about plants that are already established. So like our perennial vegetables, our trees, our shrubs. However, it's also going to apply for our annual vegetables. So bear with me. The photo on the left, pop-up sprinkler. You can also imagine this is someone hand watering with a hose. Understand that roots are only going to go where the water goes. So if we're watering shallowly, the root systems are going to be fairly shallow. And if all of a sudden we have, you know, these 65-degree days, maybe even 70-degree days, and then we all of a sudden have an 85-degree day, that water is going to evaporate really quickly. That plant is going to be stressed. Over time, with this happening, that plant is going to develop either some pest issues. The photo in the middle, that little black line above the soil is actually supposed to be irrigation tubing, and that little purple is supposed to be an emitter. Now, this is great. This person is here to illustrate that water is the water is coming out at a nice rate where it's watering deeply and thoroughly. But as the plant grows, we have to remember to bring the emitters out, add more emitters, bring them out around the drip line of that plant. And so the plant on the far right is showing that we have a nice, even, deep root system that we have supported with nice, deep, infrequent watering. And we are letting that plant dry out a few inches, the soil, I should say, that soil is drying out a few inches before we're watering again. It takes about a year to 2 years for a plant to become established when it's a perennial, a tree or a shrub. So keep that in mind. As for annuals, we're going to actually, as the plant grows, we're going to imagine that that plant is, the root system is growing as deep as the plant is getting tall. So that's a good gauge to help you out. When we work with irrigation systems, we're going to understand that these are not set it and forget it systems, that we're actually going to be moving through and setting the timers and adjust it according to the seasons. And the seasons I'm speaking to are really daylight hours. So we just went from short daylight hours, winter, into early spring, and now we're moving into longer daylight hours where we're moving towards summer months. And then into the fall, into the winter, the days will be getting smaller, shorter again. So that's something to keep in mind, that we will be changing the clock according to the seasons. But the cool thing about irrigation systems is that we're able to localize the water around the root systems of the plant. We're not watering areas of the garden that don't need to be watered. So that means we're going to not encourage weeds growing, because when the weeds when we're not watering that area, the weed seeds are going to be less likely to germinate and grow. We also want to favor the watering and set the timers for early in the morning when the air and the soil are both still cool. This is what's going to be ideal. And this is something that's really cool. Jameson, I don't remember if there is a rain barrel rebate for Napa County, so I apologize if there isn't. Regardless, you should try to have as many rain catchment systems as you can on your property. So the rain barrel on the left, it's just in my backyard. That's just a regular 50 or 55 gallon rain barrel that you get at the local hardware store. It is great. However, because I know that 1 inch of rain that falls over 1,000 square feet, for instance, the roof of my house, can capture 625 gallons of water. You get that? Isn't that wild? 1 inch of rain, 1,000 square feet, 625 gallons. That's a lot. So that's why I encourage people to, when they get those rebates or when they want to invest in a rain catchment system, to get a larger cistern. You go to your local irrigation or farm supply, you can see a lot of different varieties. That's what we're looking at on the right. I just like to throw that in. All right. So tips on maintaining your vegetable garden. We're going to build healthy soil. We're going to water the roots. We're going to adjust our irrigation controllers as the seasons go. We're going to plant and raise beds when we've got crummy soil. We're going to focus on or expand to planting heirloom vegetables, perennial fruits and vegetables, fruit trees and vines, things like that. We're going to create biodiversity by planting a variety of flowering plants to attract our beneficial insects, our pollinators, and we're going to enjoy the bounty. Other resources I like to share, especially for pest problem solving, is going to be the Our Water, Our World website. Here it is at ourwaterourworld.org. The cool thing about this website, not only are you going to be able to find those fact sheets that I shared at the beginning of the program that talk about address different insect problems, but there is a link. It might be hard to see on your screen, but right there on the home page, there's a link that says Ask the Expert. There you go, right at your own fingertips. If you've got a pest problem or a question about a pesticide or anything that has anything to do with that, we're going to just click on that, send those folks over at the Biointegral Research Center, or BIRC for short, a question, and they're going to get back to you Monday through Friday within 24 hours. And then, of course, we're going to always focus or do our research on the UCIPM website. Why is that? Because this is our local, statewide pest problem solving website. Though I know that we might have the same pest problems that someone in Ohio or New Jersey might have, but let's remember again that we are in this Mediterranean climate, and though we might have the same pest problems, the way we manage those pest problems is going to be slightly different because we have a different climate. And that's why the UCIPM website is such a great resource. More fun resources. These are just some books I like to pick up at the bookstores when I'm out and about. Actually, the Rodale's Garden and Landscape Techniques I just recently got, well, before we were sheltering in place, I got it at a garage sale for $1. Total score. I don't want to neglect also Sunset Western Garden Book. This is the Edible Garden. These are all going to be really great resources that are going to help you support a really successful vegetable and edible garden. So in close, I'm really trying to keep to that 8 o'clock. Sorry, we went over a couple minutes. But in close, I like to share when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Everything is connected. So I just like to invite you to experiment a little bit more in your garden. Don't get too discouraged if something doesn't work out. Get curious. Talk to your friends and neighbors, your family members that are also gardening. Reach out to me with questions so that we can keep growing. Because guess what? Gardening is all about trial and error, pushing limits, and having a lot of fun enjoying the bounty, right? Thank you so much. Look, we did it. What time? 3 minutes after 8, not too bad. I want to thank you. This is, I'm Suzanne Bontempo. You can find me at plantharmony.org if you've got any questions. We also have more information at the countyofnapa.org/stormwater website. We've got more amazing programs throughout the month through Bay Friendly Gardening Month, right, Ashley?
Yes.
So check out that website. And again, I hope to see you here in 2 weeks, talk about less toxic pest problem solving. So if you have to go, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your time and attention. But for those that want to stay and get their questions answered, let's do it.
Yeah, we have a gold mine of questions.
Love it.
Suzanne, so get ready, get excited.
Okay, I'm excited. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of go back to questions that were submitted first on both Facebook and on Zoom. And I'll just sort of ask them kind of in sequence of your initial presentation and how they were asked.
Okay, thank you.
So the first one, we actually also had a few that were emailed to me earlier. So
oh, cool.
Carol has a question that she also typed in the chat on Zoom. We just planted vegetable starts in raised beds and bins and need to mulch them. We have fresh redwood tree, fine shaved, chipped greens and bark available. But since it is fresh and since it is redwood, is it going to stunt veggie growth?
Okay, that's a really great question. The mulch or the bark chips that you've created, maybe from a chipper, I'm guessing, is going to, we're going to lay it out really thin, and we're not going to bring it up around the crown of the plants, and you should be fine. If you're feeling heat from that, if it is really green and young, spread it out over an area before you bring it to your vegetable garden, just so that it can decompose a little bit or deactivate itself a little bit, and that might help. But it is not going to be hot or active for very long, and then it will be a very nice mulch. If you don't have that kind of time, then you please take advantage of that beautiful mulch and put it in walkways around some perennial gardens, and again, as long as it's not coming up close to the plants. Good question.
Great. So the next couple of questions were also submitted beforehand from Luana. How can I safely keep birds from attacking my seedlings?
Great question. I like to use something called exclusion baskets or bird netting. And the exclusion basket, imagine a frame that you have created either with like PVC hoops, or maybe you've created a frame like out of like 1x1 redwood stakes that you would buy at the garden center to support plants, kind of stapled together. Then I will staple or clip on the bird netting, or I will staple on poultry wire, although that can also be kind of large, birds can still get through. So then let's look at 1/2-inch hardware cloth. I would staple 1/2-inch hardware cloth on my frame, and then that's something that's removable that I can put on top of my plants, my seedlings, and then remove it. So I have exclusion baskets on my strawberries, on my little leafy greens, on my veggie starts, because the birds do like to come in and enjoy my food too.
Next question is also from Luana. How on earth do I get rid of little pincher bugs?
I hate those pincher bugs. Those are worse. So a couple things you can do is I've heard, although I've never personally tried this, is rolling up newspaper that's slightly damp, like maybe just mist it with a little bit of water, roll it up. It still has some integrity. And apparently the earwigs like to go into that. And then in the morning when the earwigs are in there, you can just kind of roll it up and throw it away. I like to discover where they're hiding, because typically they're hiding like under like maybe some flagstone or a rock, or in the coiled hose, my garden hose. They seem to be living there. And I will get a product called diatomaceous earth. You can buy diatomaceous earth at a local garden center, and I'll lightly dust that area. And what it does, it actually gets onto that exoskeleton, and it will dehydrate them. And it's a very easy, non-toxic product to use. However, you don't want to breathe it because it's a lung irritant. We don't want to get it in our eyes because it can be an eye irritant. It's not toxic, but it's an irritant. And then we also want to make sure we're not actually physically sprinkling it onto the leaves or the plant tissue itself, because again, it can kind of damage that. But very excellent at controlling earwigs.
Great. So our next question is from Peter, who got kicked off and was able to rejoin us. I'm glad you were able to rejoin us, Peter.
Oh, great.
He says, I have raised beds, one season old good soil mix that I topped this year with soil amended. Sorry, hold on one second. It just went away. I have raised beds, one season old good soil mix that I topped this year with soil amendment bumper crop.
Great.
Would fertilizing with tea or liquid through the season be okay, or is that overkill, so to speak?
Okay, so compost tea, liquid fertilizer is what I'm assuming. So compost tea is awesome. It is gold. And so what we want to do is another way of inoculating our soils with that microbiology that I was talking at the beginning. We want to add that. And in fact, if we get a little bit of that compost tea on the plants, it's also going to enhance the plants, allow the nutrients to absorb through those cells as well. Compost tea also has a lot of properties in it that will increase or bolster the health of the plants so that they can even be more resilient to pest problems. Typically, compost tea is going to be a little pricey. So, and I'm a huge fan. I will also oftentimes suggest that on areas of a garden that maybe are nutrient poor, or areas of the garden that maybe the plants are struggling. But I would probably, because it has a tendency to be a little bit more expensive, a little bit more fragile, when we have the compost tea, we really need to use it pretty much immediately because it is perishable. I will have a tendency to work with those liquid organic fertilizers that I had mentioned before. That's usually my preference. A little less expensive, not as fragile, maybe a little bit more accessible, easier to work with.
Great. So going back to when you were talking about sort of the pattern in which you plant your garden, a question from Gail: how close together can you plant in that hexagon formation that you use?
Okay, great question. We're going to go back to those tags that I was talking about. And on the tags, they typically, I don't know if you could see this very well, maybe not. The tags will have will give you the range of what the plant's going to grow. And typically it'll say some type of spacing. So this is an heirloom lettuce that I got. And it says, one of the things it mentions is that it's going to grow 12 inches wide by 18 inches tall. Now, 12 inches wide. So by this, they're probably saying to plant about 12 inches apart, because the leaves, half of that 6 inches, but I have a tendency to go just slightly closer. So I probably planted these about 10 inches apart, and they're growing fine. And the reason why is because I'm going to harvest some younger ones when they're not at full maturity. I'm going to pluck those out. And then by the time I've plucked them out, the other ones that are still there can reach full maturity and expand through that area. I hope that makes sense. You're going to use the guide of what the plant, the size of the plant, the maximum size that the plant's going to get. You're going to use that as your gauge. So every plant's going to be slightly different.
Great. So our next question is from Megan. And her question is, what are your thoughts on adding biology before chemistry when soil amending?
What do you mean by chemistry?
You don't know the answer to that. That's the entirety of the question.
So,
So Megan, if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit in the chat box.
Yeah, Megan, if you're still here, that would be really great, because I'm interpreting it as chemistry being a synthetic, whereas biology is an organic, and I don't want to misinterpret your question.
So let's maybe come back to that one after we give you a chance. So the next question is from Eileen. Does planting lettuce so close together increase aphids? I think she's referring to that, the slide that you had that had all of your lettuce fairly close together with no soil showing through between plants.
That's a really great question. What I have noticed, I grow a lot of my vegetables, my annual vegetables, from seed. I also will buy things from the garden center, just like you. And what I've noticed is that when I buy from the garden center, those plants will have a tendency to get aphids, whereas the plants I'm growing from seed do not. There's two reasons for this. One, the plants from the garden center have been in those pots. They're slightly stressed out. They really wish they would have been in the ground in your garden a little sooner than they're getting there. And because they're slightly stressed out, they're going to attract some aphids. As that plant matures, it should grow through. It should adapt, adjust, not be so stressed out, and it should grow through that pest problem. Another reason is when we're planting from seed, typically I'm harvesting the seeds from plants that are already here. So those plants are really adapted to the area that I live. They're adapted to my garden. So they're going to be a little stronger. So moving forward, if you can, harvest seeds from those plants and try to grow from those seeds, you're going to have plants that are more resilient. Or if that's just not possible, because it's not possible for everybody, try to note that you're going to, or expect you're going to get aphids, monitor those plants, wipe them off, blast them off with water the first sign that you see them. They will grow through it. Hit them with some good liquid fertilizer, get their strength up. They should push through it, no problem.
Great. Our next question is from RCD staff member Eric. Where can I learn about which bugs are beneficial and which are harmful to my garden, and what to do about pests? And you already mentioned this, Suzanne, but I'll mention it again, that we do have a program coming up at the end of the month on the 28th of May, right here on Zoom and Facebook Live, about integrated pest management with Suzanne.
I was just looking around my desk to see if I have the 10 most wanted. The Our Water Our World website has this really cool brochure called the 10 most wanted good bugs in the garden. And I encourage you to go check that out. UCIPM also has a really cool catalog of beneficial insects, natural enemies that we'll see in our gardens as well. Those are really going to be two great resources for you to learn about the good bugs. I can share that 90% of the bugs that are in our gardens are actually good bugs. So it's just a few that are bad. And typically those bad bugs are seasonal. So it's going to be, aphid season happens like now, early spring. Then once the heat comes on, we see aphids kind of go down in populations or completely zero, but then we might see them ramp back up again slightly in the fall. So it's a seasonal problem. Or like those Those tomato hornworms, we kind of know that we're going to start to see them once the summer really comes on. Maybe we're seeing them now. It seems like it might be a little early. I feel like that's a real significant problem in June and July. So when you know what the pest is, you kind of know what time of the year to start looking for it.
Great. Okay, next question is from Peter. Is straw, not hay, but straw, a good option for mulch cover?
Great question. I'm a huge fan of rice straw. I like rice straw. I like to mulch it around my vegetables, my raised beds and in-ground vegetable plots, because it has a very high silica content because of the rice. So it has a tendency to not decompose very quickly. It mats down really nicely. It does allow air to flow, even though it's also retaining some moisture. So rice straw is my tip there. You can get it at the feed store.
So next is another question from Megan, not following up from the other one, but a separate question. What are some good long season organic seed companies that you could recommend?
I'm a huge fan of Baker Creek Seed Company. Botanical Interest is also really awesome. They have a huge line of organics. Renee's Seeds, I'm not sure if they're still, I'm sure they're still around, and they're kind of local. And then from there, who else? I know that there is a couple other seed companies out there. I don't really know them all, sadly, but that's a good start, I would say. And again, I'm not really here to endorse any company, but Baker Creek and Botanical Interests are really good. They have a lot of integrity. They're sourcing their seeds, legitimately and fairly, and with good intentions and integrity. So.
Great. We're about, just to let you know where we're at, Suzanne, we're about 50% through our questions.
Oh, good. This is great.
Question from Cheyenne. Any recommendations on good foods that we can start planting right now?
Right now? Absolutely. So our tomatoes, I have not put my tomatoes in yet. I feel like it's still slightly early. Summer squash can be going in now. Green beans can be going in now. I will always be putting, I have a small container that I have a tendency to rotate radishes through. I'll do a few crops of radishes, and then I'll throw in some lettuces. And then after I've eaten lettuces, I'll throw in some radishes. Understand, lettuces, once the heat comes on, they're going to need a cooler location in the garden, maybe some afternoon shade. If it gets too hot, leafy greens like lettuces will not do very well, but we're still in a good window. Let's see what else. Cucumbers, peppers. It's a little late for broccoli, a little late for cabbages, because once the heat comes on, they have a tendency to bolt, things like that. Arugula is really great to kind of, I like to kind of throw seeds around and grow arugula year round. Hopefully that's a good start. That Pam Pierce Golden Gate Gardener, though it might seem like it's just for San Francisco, it sure isn't. Check it out. See if you can get it, a digital copy from the library, or see if you can order a copy like from the local bookstore. She does an amazing job mapping out on a calendar what crops to grow and when, and if you're growing it from seed versus buying it from a little start, like a 4-inch plant or a 6-inch plant. So she's the Golden Gate Gardener by Pam Pierce is a really great resource. Yeah.
I'm going to jump around just a tiny little bit. So follow-up question, very much related. How long will seeds be good after you open a package of seeds?
That is a really great question. So when we buy a packet of seeds, it'll say for planting year 2020, for instance. That phrase is to share that every single one of those seeds has 100% germination rate, that every single one of those seeds will germinate and create the plant it's supposed to create. Over time, that germination rate will become reduced. The seeds might not have the same vitality, especially if they're not stored properly. So I don't really have a proper seed storing. I have a cupboard in my living room. I know it gets pretty hot, so they have a tendency to maybe not be preserved as well as they should. Again, if we were to store them in like a refrigerator or a freezer, if there's moisture in that bag, that can also be detrimental to the seeds. So storing the seeds in a cool, dry place is ideal, not always available, but then when we can store them, they'll have longevity and vitality they'll be fine for years to come. I still have packets of seeds from 2015 that I'm growing from right now. And I think the only ones that are not germinating is because I didn't plant them properly. I don't think it had anything to do with the fact that they lost their vitality.
Next question is from Tammy. Can you suggest a resource that lists for our area and by season flowers that provide pollen and nectar for our pollinators? I would love to have plants that provide pollen and nectar year round.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. There's another really cool resource on the Our Water, Our World website. It's a fact sheet, so you'll find it underneath that tab, and it's called Healthy Gardens. And that's going to have a list of plants that are going to support our pollinators and our beneficial insects. I can also share back to that 10 Most Wanted brochure that I mentioned before. That's also going to have a list of plants that are going to offer nectar sources for our beneficial insects. I'm not sure if the Napa County Master Gardeners has a list, but I have found that when I just do an internet search, Master Gardeners typically have a list of plants that attract beneficial insects. I haven't been to, places like Van Winden, Central Valley Builders, and St. Helena. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have a list. I'm not sure. I've never really been to Central Valley Builders website. So it might cater more to the like lumber and plumbing supplies, but even just going there or calling them on the phone and seeing if they had something like a PDF they could email you, you might try them. Oh, and also Mid-City might have a list as well down in American Canyon. They're awesome.
And I also would like to give a little plug. The UC Master Gardener folks are putting together a suite of resources, kind of not as a part of Bay Friendly Garden Month, but sort of just, parallel to that. And they are also focusing on pollinators. So feel free to make sure that you go to their website and check out the resources that they're putting together as well.
Yeah, because Ashley, isn't there a talk next week about habitat and attracting pollinators?
Actually, this week is our how to attract pollinators to your garden. That's what our theme is this week. So we've done a couple of videos. We did one this morning and we did one on Monday about using native plants to draw native pollinators to your garden. And we did some things that sort of focus on different seasons throughout the year within Napa County. So make sure you check out our website and Facebook page for those too.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so Sarah has a question. Please outline flowers that protect plants and which flowers protect which plants. Or is there a place that she can go to find that resource?
Can you repeat that? Are you talking about plants like companion planting that might act as repellents?
I think so.
Okay.
I think that's the gist of the question.
So again, the Pam Pierce book, The Golden Gate Gardener, has a nice list of plants that will act as repellents for certain pests, as well as plants that will attract the beneficials. So that's another resource for those looking for more resources for attracting beneficials. Specifically to your question, I know that marigolds will have some repelling properties, but off the top of my head, I don't really have a list or can share what I know for sure that's going to be more of a deterrent. I really just like to attract the beneficials, as many as I can, so that can help create the balance where, as opposed to trying to detour. That is helpful. Sorry, maybe I wasn't so, that wasn't such a good one I could answer. I don't know.
No, I think you did fine. Next question is from Megan. Do you have to inoculate to get beans and legumes to be nitrogen fixers?
I've heard that if you're buying from seed, like I think it's peas, right? That you really do need to inoculate them so that they'll germinate. As far as if I'm planting beans in the ground, that's just what they naturally do. So I don't have to do anything else. I'm just planting like the fava beans in the ground, and they're creating that beautiful nitrogen fixed bacteria.
And moving on to irrigation, Megan has another question. What is your timing for drip? She says that she is doing 60 minutes every other day and is wondering if that's too much for a place like Napa County.
What a great question. I really am loving all of these questions. They're really quite good, very thoughtful. Okay, so with irrigation, I can't tell you. That's the whole reason why learning how to water is so difficult. We have to really understand what kind of soil we have so that we can understand how water is going to be moving through it. You said 60 minutes every other day. Is that right?
Correct.
So the other part of this is that what is the emitter? What is the output of flow? So those little emitters that either are individual plugs, or if it's the spaghetti tubing that has emitters every 6 or 12 inches, those are all going to be releasing water at a rate. It could be 1 gallon an hour, it could be 2 gallons an hour, it could be half a gallon an hour. That's something you want to understand. And then from there, understand how the water is moving through the soil. And how we do that is, one, we can just dig a hole with our shovel that's about the size of a gallon, so we can then fill that up with a gallon of water and see, physically time it. How fast is that water draining? That could help us understand. The other part is wait, I just lost it. Oh yeah, so with the emitters, we want to, when we have our irrigation clock on, let's say you have it set for 60 minutes every other day. Well, if it's a 1 gallon an hour emitter, or is it a 2 gallon an hour per emitter? So you see how I wouldn't be able to identify that unless you knew? Or is it a half a gallon per hour? So that's going to help you. And then how many emitters are in the area? Is it 4 emitters that are 1 gallon per hour? So that'd be 4 gallons. Is it a fruit tree? Is it something that really likes water and is absorbing? Or is your microclimate in your backyard such that that soil is drying out really quickly? So a couple tricks that I like to share for you is to, before that irrigation is supposed to come on again, let's say, so today's Wednesday night, let's say the irrigation went off today and it's not supposed to go on again until Friday morning. Tomorrow night, before sundown, or really early Friday morning before the irrigation comes back on, dig around and see, is the soil dry? Has the soil dried out enough? Maybe it hasn't. So then, it's hard to tell, because did you guys get as much rain? I'm in Sonoma County and it's been raining every day. So it would be kind of hard to, wait till things dry out where you have just your irrigation going. Dig around and see, has the soil dried out yet? You might discover that it hasn't. So then turn the irrigation off and then check check Saturday morning. Is the soil dry yet? Does it need to come on yet? And then if it does, then we know, okay, you can go every 2 days without having the irrigation on. Or maybe you just need to put the irrigation on twice a week. right now, I suspect that it's too much. I don't have my irrigation on that much yet. I still have my irrigation on just for 2 days a week. And I have it pretty heavily spaced with emitters. I have it, pretty saturated, and I have it about 30 minutes to 40 minutes twice a week, but I know I'm getting even saturation and enough volume. But yeah, do a little investigation. And then reach out to your local irrigation store. The folks there are really nice and really helpful, like Ewing. I'm not sure what other irrigation store might be in Napa off the top of my head, or like a farm supply that might be have irrigation supplies. They might be able to help you as well. And if not, feel free to email me. I can totally set you straight. I can help you out. I can answer any of your questions beyond just now.
Great. So the next question is coming from Facebook. Do you have any recommendations for composting systems that will yield liquid compost that you can then use on your garden?
So liquid compost is something that you're going to make from compost that you've either purchased or that you've made in your own garden. A compost system that you're making should not be so wet that it is leaching out liquid, okay? Worm bins, on the other hand, vermiculture, part of the worm bin, that vermiculture will naturally leach out some liquids. It's not necessarily called tea. Some people refer to it as tea, but that liquid is loaded with microbiology, and you can, yes, get it out into your garden. So I guess the answer to your question would be a worm bin. But a yard compost system should not be so wet that it's leaching water. You want to add water to it and agitate it and kind of make a tea that way, and then get it out into the garden.
So Juan has a question, and I think you answered this a little bit during your presentation about raised beds, but what's the best way of dealing with gophers and moles invading your raised beds?
I know, isn't it a problem? Those gophers. Now, moles, I have to share, I consider moles to be beneficial. They're actually eating grubs and other insects that are in the soil. So they typically are a problem in a nice estate lawn because they're shallow tunnelers, and they will kind of wreck a nice lawn. But other than that, I welcome moles because I know they're eating insects that are later going to become pests for me. But gophers, on the other hand, will completely take down a huge artichoke in pretty much one afternoon by just nibbling that root system. And all of a sudden you see this artichoke just go whoop down into the hole. Can't tell you how many times I've seen that. Making sure everything's planted in gopher baskets, or your raised beds are lined with gopher wire. That's going to be a barrier. That's a preventative mean. From there, working with traps. It's not for everybody. However, the traps are going to be very effective. You do need to be kind of persistent. Gophers are smart. There's a lot of tricks to that. And then after that, we can work with some repellents. So for instance, on one of my deer fences, I plant sweet peas. Well, I'm not able to get gopher wire down there because the fence exists. So the minute I start seeing gopher activity, I will apply a repellent. Typically the active ingredient that I find works really well is a castor oil active ingredient. It's not toxic, but what it does is that when we can saturate the soil, the gophers do not like it. Gophers and moles, they don't see very well. In fact, moles don't see very well at all, but they really use their whiskers as sensory and to help them navigate when they're digging. And when we have this castor oil in the soil, they don't like it to get on their fur or on their whiskers because it prevents them from being able to feel their way through. It disrupts those nerve endings. So the castor oil repellents can be very effective, although they do need to get reapplied. So it can get a little expensive. UCIPM has a really cool YouTube channel that will go through how to set gopher traps, how to identify gopher tunnels. So go over to YouTube, type in those 5 letters UCIPM in the search, and you'll see a bunch of videos that come up. Check out the ones on gophers. I think they'll offer you a lot of support and guidance.
Great. We have only 2 questions left, Suzanne. We're on the home stretch.
Yay.
So Carol has a question. We've collected and crushed eggshells for decades in containers, but they aren't quite as fine as sand. Are these still good to use as a part of mulch?
That's such an interesting thing. I like to use the eggshells, or I've heard of using eggshells as a deterrent for slugs and snails because they can't really cross it. However, if we are using eggshells in the garden, I encourage people to bake them off first. Just put them on a baking sheet in the oven, maybe just during the time that we're warming the oven up when we're about to, cook a roast or maybe roast up some veggies. The reason why is because we want to kill off any, unfavorable like bacteria or pathogens that might be on there, like salmonella, and then we want to then we can get them out into the garden. And over time, they break down and they are a nice calcium source for the soil. However, it does take a while for the microorganisms to actually decompose that. So as a mulch, you can use it. It might not be, it really depends on the outcome you're looking for, I would say. Other chunky arbor mulches might be less expensive and easier to work with.
Great. And our last question from Carol. I scattered handfuls of old celery seed in a 4-foot square area, and a thicket of tiny leaf sets have popped up. What's the best way to spread, share, or transplant them? Or do I need to just thin them?
Wow, how fun is that? Congratulations. You can easily get a trowel and lift them up. I work on a baking sheet, to be honest, and I'll just kind of very gently go through and separate them. And then if you want to transplant them to another garden bed, great. What I do is I'll transplant them to like little 4-inch pots that I've collected over the years. The pots from the nursery, when I'm buying a plant, I just hold on to them, wash them out, save them, and then I'll transplant them in there. And then I'll let the plant grow a little bit. Gives me the opportunity to share them with friends and family, or it buys me some time when if I have an abundance of plants but I don't have the garden bed set up yet, I know that they can grow in these 4-inch pots until I'm ready to plant them in the ground in other areas. So yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations. Isn't it fun?
And I am very impressed that we have 14 people still hanging on the Zoom.
Yeah, nice job.
Hanging out on Facebook Live. So thanks so much for joining us a solid 40 minutes after our end time.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. I really hope that you got what you were looking for out of this program, that I was able to offer you some tips, some techniques, some support to continue to grow some awesome food and flowers. Again, I am here to support you, so please don't hesitate to email me, find me on my website, join my newsletter. I send out about every week tips just to help us grow more beautiful gardens. And then see me in 2 weeks. We're going to really dive into some pest problem solving, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and stay tuned. Stay tuned for Bay Friendly Garden Month. We've got things happening all the time. We just did a tour this morning, and we'll have more coming up next week. And that last week in May is going to be talking about how to create more joy by using less chemicals and less water in your garden. So we're really excited to continue on with Bay Friendly Garden Month. And thank you so much, Suzanne, and also to Jameson and the Napa Countywide Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. It's a
Yes.
mouthful, but we're happy you're here.
Thank you, Jameson. Thank you,
Yes, yes,
Ashley.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will, the recording is available immediately on Facebook Live if there's a certain part that you missed. And then if you are not on Facebook, we should have this video available for everybody, hopefully no later than Monday. And with that, I think that I will say good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye,
Have
everybody.
fun. Oh my gosh, so great.